Hello and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. I'm really excited about this week's guest. On the show today, I'm speaking to Assia Belgacem, a French-Algerian writer and book critic based in Bordeaux, France. Assia runs the Instagram account She Reads Ox, where she writes nuanced book reviews and gives excellent book recommendations. In this episode, we talk about Assia's identity, Algerian and French, and also about being Muslim in an increasingly right-wing France. With hijab bans in place in the country, Assia works as a teacher in a government school where she is unable to cover her hair. We talk about so much, including French and Algerian history, political activism, books, and so much more. At the time of recording, it has been almost 70 days since the beginning of Israel's most recent war on Gaza, where so far over 20,000 people have been killed. Thousands are still trapped under rubble, and shortages of food and water are becoming lethal. Naturally, we talked about Palestine today too. Assia's work focuses on decolonization, French politics, and African and Swana literature. Hello, Assia. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. How are you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really big honor for me. I am doing fine. I'm well, I guess. I mean, with what's happening in Palestine, I can't say I'm doing well, but I'm definitely doing well compared to Palestinians on the ground and the Palestinian diaspora. So, alhamdulillah.
Sure, I feel the same. I
I'm
feel
sure.
like alhamdulillah, like I'm in good health, I'm eating, I'm sleeping, I'm doing all of those kind of,
Hmm.
and I say I'm sleeping, I'm not sleeping, I haven't been sleeping well at all for the past few months, but yeah, like overall, like I'm safe, I'm fine.
Exactly, yes.
It feels so weird to feel so physically comfortable
Hmm.
when we know what's happening and we see it in front of our eyes every single day. It's a really, it's a really strange situation.
I think there's also a lot of guilt in us for being alive, for having a roof over our heads, for being able to deconnect, for being able to sleep, which is such a basic need that a lot of Palestinians cannot get because of the bombings right now. So also I find it amazing that we can actually disconnect, like that our brain can disconnect us from what's going on for a matter of hours. But it's also for us, I think, a matter of survival because we have to work, we have to be safe. Because speaking about Palestine in workplaces is very very difficult and can come with great consequences. So I think our brain knows what to do, and so we disconnect. But I know that for me, as soon as I'm out of work, out of the workplace, and in my usual safe space, then the first thing I do is go back to Instagram to check what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you with that a lot because I mean I have the privilege of working freelance at the moment, but obviously like even as somebody that works freelance, like I have contracts with various organizations and businesses, and you have to think about how an organization is dealing with the issue. Are they saying anything? Are they
Hmm.
not? Is there an environment where you can speak about it, or is there just simply not? And I think that it's a growing hostile environment around the world.
Very.
And I think, especially in the West and in France, where you are, in the UK, where I am, like our political leaders are basically justifying what is going on, are so heavily in support of the state of Israel. It leaves any sort of resistance or protest, sometimes even conversation, an actual like punishable crime by
Yeah.
law, which is really scary. And I think we'll come back to this a little bit, I think, but I just want to talk a little bit about you. So you are a book critic, a book blogger,
Yeah.
and you also write. So
Yes.
just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do, what you're interested in, what you're interested in writing about, and how your journey is going.
So I ended up writing because I have a lot to say, and I felt that the longer I kept it inside, the worse it got for me because I got a lot of frustration from not being able to express myself. And being in France doesn't make it easy to express myself as a French, Algerian, Muslim, hijabi, like all these parts of my identity. But I really felt a freedom within the English speaking community of Instagram. That's where I really found a way out for me, a way to express myself. Because like even when I started on Bookstagram back in the days, I was pretty much the only French Bookstagrammer wearing a hijab, so Muslim wearing a hijab. And I realized that I was censoring myself so much I didn't see the point of being on Instagram. So I just started unfollowing a lot of people I used to follow, so French bookstagrammers, because their content didn't speak to me and it didn't help me express myself the way I wanted. And so slowly I was moving towards more British, American bookstagrammers. Most of the time it was people of color, Muslims too. And that's when I was like, wow, they're really just being open about anything. And that's when I realized I was actually censoring myself. So it's really within the English speaking community worldwide that I find myself able to express myself. And so when I express myself, it's mostly in English. It's
Mm.
very rarely in French. And so I write for platforms, for English speaking platforms, the New Arab Middle East Eye, Arasif, who is both Arabic speaking and English speaking. And because I feel safe, and I'm also learning from the English speaking platform, from the English speaking world, so I know that what I'm going to say is not going to be groundbreaking, is not going to be taken as an offense. It's not going to be, people are not going to feel threatened by what I say because I'm learning from them. And so I'm also repeating what I'm learning. And I also get a space where I can express myself as someone who is French, because my views as a French are not really tolerated in France. And I rarely speak about my experience as a French person with within French platforms.
Mm.
So we do. I'm not. So that's something I always say. It's not always black and white. We do have spaces in France where like people of color, Muslim people can speak freely, but within the context of French politics, it still comes with repercussions and it's taking risks. And I'm not sure I want to put myself in that space because my goal is to find a platform where I can speak freely. So freedom of expression, which is very claimed to in France, but not applied to everyone. So I'm looking for a platform where I have freedom of speech and where I won't put my safety at risk. Because the first goal for me is to protect myself. I really, I hate situations where I feel threatened.
Mm.
It's just not comfortable for anyone, not just for
And
me.
exactly, and I think, as you said, like your safety is of paramount importance.
Exactly.
And I think, we live in such an age where I think we can't always perceive like how dangerous it
Mm-hmm.
can be to say certain things, and the consequences, the short term and the long term consequences of doing certain things as well. And I do want to get into it a little bit about exactly what it's like, as a Muslim woman living in France. But I want to talk a little bit about your French Algerian identity.
Mm-hmm.
So, France and Algeria have a very contentious history, and I think actually, like a lot of people don't know because it's not something that is massively taught about in schools. It's not, I don't think the average person walking down the street
Mm-hmm.
will have much of a clue, I'm not particularly well versed
Mm-hmm.
in the history myself, but I can imagine that part of your identity is very at odds in some ways. And I just wondered if you could reflect on that a little bit.
It is in so many ways. So first of all, it kind of makes sense that a lot of people are not aware of the Algerian history of colonization by France, because well, most English-speaking countries have ties to the UK,
Yeah,
so it makes more sense again. It shouldn't be making sense, to be honest,
absolutely.
because the history of British colonialism is not with Algeria, it's not with Morocco, it's not with Tunisia. So these countries, it was mostly they were mostly mainly colonized by France. But then even in French history textbook, you'll find very few things about the colonization of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. So, how it works for me as a French Algerian. So, first of all, speaking of my identity, I always identify myself as Algerian and French. So, in the intro I gave you, I wrote French Algerian just because it flows better. That's it. But there's no specific meaning behind it. So I identify myself as Algerian and then French because in it's just how I became. I was
Mm.
born Algerian because I was born in Algeria and grew up there for 6 years, and then moved to France, and so that's when it's like this whole identity is Algerian plus French. So
Mm.
it's something that was added to my original identity. And by coming to France, I never really broke that link with Algeria. Pretty much all year long, speaking Algerian at home, celebrating Algerian festivities, the Algerian independence. The fact that I was born also, I'm gonna brag a little bit because Alhamdulillah, my mom did a really good job. I was born on July the 5th, which is the Independence Day of Algeria.
Oh wow,
So that also plays
the country.
exactly. So that plays also a lot in my identity. And so we are very much Algerian, and then we became French. So I kind of learned to be French. I learned the French society, how things work, the French norms, and so some of them are completely agree with, some of them I don't agree with, but it works the same way for Algerian society and my Algerian identity. Some of the things I agree with, some of the things I don't, but I feel just more Algerian than French, and it also has repercussions on the language I speak. Even if French has also become my native language, I rarely use it. I read mostly in English. I really don't read a lot in French unless it's something very important and I have a specific intention and goal behind reading in French. Otherwise, I'm just never going to go buy a book in French because, oh, why not? This book looks interesting. I'm going to read it. This is just never going to happen. And the very
Mm.
few times I did it, I ended up just not reading the book. Again, because English gives me that safety space that I don't get in French. Every
Mm.
time I try to read a book in French, I just can't go through with it, or I read words that really traumatize me. So there's a word we use in that is used widely in France is ostentatoire, and it means it's usually used for religious signs. So there's a French law that says that some religious signs that are provocative are
Mm.
forbidden, including the hijab, because it's too big. People notice it. So
Mm.
it's forbidden. Being France being a laic country, so where laicite is the norm. So
Mm.
you can't show your religion in government spaces. So in schools or at work, if you're being paid by the government, etc. So this word is very traumatizing for me. I have the worst experience with this word, and so I
Mm.
started reading a book. It was about Algeria, and it was written by an Algerian, and the last thing I expected in this book is that word. So
Mm.
that word was used, I think it was on page 10,
Oh wow.
and I was so shocked. I closed the book. I never opened it again. And I know that the book is really good, it's really great. It's about the Algerian trauma because of colonization. So the content is probably amazing, but I just couldn't go past page 10 because of that word. So,
Interesting. Was that book originally written in French?
yes, originally written in French.
Ah.
And by no means, like, the book is not like the author is someone really good. Her research is amazing about Algerian trauma. It's called Colonial Trauma by Karima Nazali. It's a very good book. I just need to go past page 10, and I need to go past that word to just, but I just can't remove it. I don't know why. It just, I haven't found, I guess, the strength to go back to that book and
Yeah.
just ignore that word.
Do you think there are other people that have a similar like a relationship as you do to that particular word in French?
I'm pretty sure, yes. I'm pretty sure that hijabi Muslims hate this word.
Hmm.
It's used, you can use it for everything,
Hmm.
but it's only used for Islam and specifically the hijab.
Ah, I see.
Do you know what I mean?
And do you think that there's so to describe other religious symbols, like say like the cross that Christians wear, for example, is there another word that that is used or could be used to describe that in the same context?
You could say provocative, but is anyone
Mm,
really, is a big, is a huge cross
mm,
really provocative? It's not really
mm,
that provocative. It's, you know, it's this relationship that France has with the hijab that again goes back to the colonization, because during the Algerian colonization, France had a massive propaganda to make Algerian women remove their hijab, and the poster literally said, "Remove your hijab, you'll be more beautiful."
oh my gosh.
So it's a very deep relationship. It's not just about Islam, it's not just religion.
Mm,
It's religion and colonization, and also the fact that after 132 years, France lost Algeria, which wasn't considered as a colony. It was, Algeria was part of France.
mm,
It wasn't like, it was very different from Morocco and Tunisia, because for Morocco and Tunisia, the word they use is a protectorate, which is
mm,
just another way to say colonization. But for Algeria, Algeria was part of France. It was called French Algeria. So it's the relationship that France has with the hijab is not necessarily just linked to religion itself. It goes back to religion, to colonization, to the fact that they lost after 132 years, that Algeria became independent, that we were able to express ourselves, the fact that we resisted, the fact that we actually use this to resist. Because
mm,
during the war, a lot of men used to wear the traditional Algerian hijab, which isn't really a hijab. It's kind of like a huge piece of fabric that we use to cover, just kind of like an abaya, but
mm,
not really an abaya. And
mm,
so you could use that, and you would also put it like under your, you could also hide your face with it, so it would end like this.
mm.
Okay. And so men use that as a disguise,
Oh.
Algerian men who were
Mm,
resisting the colonization. So there's like, I think France is not ready to accept a lot of things, has yet
mm,
to accept a lot of things. And
mm,
so the way I see it, I'm not sure if it is accurate or not, but the way I feel it, I feel like it's kind of taking its anger out on us, or
mm,
its regrets out on us. So that's also why I feel very conflicted with my French identity. I just can't be at peace with my French identity, because they don't let me be at peace with my French identity.
mm. That's really, really interesting because I think so much of almost like the surge in Islamophobia around the world
Yeah.
has happened in a post 9/11 world. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying that there wasn't anything before, of course, there has
Yeah.
always been skepticism and othering and racism and all that kind of stuff. But I think the surge of it and like the politicization of it has happened in this 9/11 world.
Mm.
Um, but what is really fascinating is to understand that actually, like when it comes to Algeria, it goes years and years back,
Way back.
like you said,
Exactly. Yeah.
over 100 years back, and it adds such depth to understanding because I have always wondered, like exactly why there is so much hatred for the hijab, and I haven't been able to accept that it's just that it's just a now thing, because the way in which it's playing out feels very, very bizarre. And it's really interesting listening to you speak, actually, because I'm of Pakistani origin. My parents, Pakistan is also a former colony of the UK, and so my parents came to the UK in the 60s and 70s, and I was born here, so I have a very different relationship to the UK than my parents did.
Yes.
But in the way that you describe sort of holding on to Algeria, I saw my parents hold on to Pakistan. And even now, as a daughter of immigrants and as a daughter of a former colonized people, the thing that I struggle with the most about being British is when I think about what Britain did to my people, especially during partition, but even before, like what they did in terms of the divide and conquer, what they did when they left, like how everyone, like all that violence, and it was at the hands of the people whose state I am now living under, and actually living a really wonderful life and having lots of freedom, right? So it's a constant sort of struggle that I think I always felt on some level, but only very recently, in the recent few years, maybe partly because I've grown up, but partly because I've been reading more and learning more. It's really hard to find a place for that. And I say that as like as a second generation immigrant, or
And you know what? Actually, when I talk to children of immigrants, and then I talk to their parents who are immigrants, I feel much closer to their parents than to the children of immigrants in so many ways, because I came here and I was Algerian, period, just Algerian, and I had to learn how to integrate. I really don't like this word, but I had to learn to live in a French society and learn the codes of French society. And so, but deep down, I was always, and I'm still Algerian. And so many things happened that shocked me when I was very young. So I remember a few years after we came to France, I was in middle school, and we were talking about the fact that we are Arabs with other Arab kids, etc. And there was that one teacher who said, "You never know. You never know that you're Arab. You can't know for sure that you're Arab." And I was like, "I know I'm Arab. Like, what are you saying? You can't be out of nowhere decide to deny my identity. I know I'm Arab. I know I'm Algerian. I know I'm North African. You're not gonna tell me who I am." And so it's kind of like that. Very early on, I had to, and I think I didn't know it, I didn't do it in a conscious way. I was holding on to my identity because they were denying. So, and then I had to live in France where they were denying my identity and they didn't like my first identity. So it's just, there's so much conflict and things to resolve and to be at peace with. But you just, again, there's so many things I can't be at peace with because they're always bringing it to the table. I'm like, if you want me to move past that, then you also have to move past that. And if you can't move past the loss of Algeria, then I can't move past my French identity because you're just not giving me space for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your experience, obviously, so you came to France when you were 6 years old. Things have obviously over time they've changed. What has your experience been like with that change? And I asked this question because I feel like in common discourse, it's only been very recent. I'd say maybe 5 to 10 years max, I would say, that there's been an understanding that France is very right wing in its approach. Maybe 15.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, and so I think there's not been that understanding. Like, I now think about visiting France and feel like, oh, I don't think I can do it. But 15, 20 years ago, I didn't have that same sense. So what has it been like in terms of, has it gotten more intense over the years? What was it like when you were younger? What's it like now?
Okay, so it's for sure very, very right wing. It's honestly become scary for a lot of us to see the change that's happening in France. And when I say for a lot of us, I really honestly don't mean just us people of color, but even white French people are like, okay, things are not really going well in France. What's happening to our country? Well, even before, so I came to France in 2000, and even before that, France was very anti-racist. There were a lot of marches against racism. There were a lot of movements, but now these same movements are not very well accepted.
Mm.
A lot of it's become normal to be racist and to express your racism on TV. I never watch French TV because every single time they invite people who are so outspoken about their racism, and it's freedom of expression, and under the label of freedom of expression they say the worst things ever. And on a political level, a few years ago, the right wing party of Marine Le Pen and her father would never be accepted. Now
Mm.
more people are voting for them. They're kind of like they're kind of like the Trump of the
Mm.
USA. But you also have to know that Marine Le Pen is very, very racist and wants to send all North Africans and immigrants back to their home. But again, this has become a normal idea. Now
Mm.
everyone is saying we have to send back bad immigrants to their home country. So it used to be a very, very extreme right wing party idea, but now it's become very normal. A lot of politicians are saying yes, bad immigration, we have to send them back home. And so Marine Le Pen, her father was in fought during the Algerian War of Independence. Obviously, he was with France, and he was against Algeria. So it's kind of difficult to imagine anything good coming from their party. That would be completely insane. Even if a lot of people, but so much people are voting for them, it's scary because now she actually has a chance to become president. Fortunately, but also unfortunately, we have a few years left with Macron, who is also, I mean, it's ridiculous what has
Mm.
become of France. It's really ridiculous because there, Macron said a few years ago that anti Zionism is anti Semitism. And he said that, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. So it's not that recent. Like he didn't say this because of the recent events in Palestine and October 7, etc. He said that way back then. And this is so scary because you really, really understand that freedom of speech, which is so dear to France, is actually fake. It's a
Mm.
fallacy. Like who's going to believe you when you say this, when you say that freedom of speech is important and we have to uphold this concept, when you say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, when there are two completely different things.
Mm.
So to answer your question, France is going towards an extremely severe and scary path. God protect us. It's the only thing I can say because at this point it's out of our hands. I'm not sure really what we can do because the more we try to fight this, I feel the more the country and the ideas of politicians and the ideas that they spread become extreme.
I think the other thing that's really scary is that France is not alone in its move further right. I think we're seeing it in many countries around the world, the UK included for sure. So you just referenced that definition of anti-Zionism, or well, I guess the definition is of anti-Semitism. And I just yesterday actually looked up what it says on the UK government website in terms of the definition. And this is back
I'm
in
scared.
2016. this is back in 2016,
Oh.
there is also a discussion about the fact that criticism of Israel and Zionism can be considered anti-Semitism. Obviously, it's a little bit, the wording is a little bit like unclear.
Mm-hmm.
In part it sort of leaves it down to the person experiencing it to determine whether or not they feel like it is anti-Semitic and if it is based on hatred. But it is definitely there, and I mean we've seen it play out massively over the last 2 months, especially with the rhetoric around the protests happening, being labelled hate marches, with things being banned, certain slogans being banned, the use of certain words are definitely being brought into the public as being anti-Semitic, which is not true. So it's really frustrating and it's really scary to see that development. And the reason why I asked you a little bit earlier on about if there was another word to describe the religious symbol, because the first time, and this was years ago now, the first time I came across, or like I started to look into France's ban on hijab,
Mm-hmm.
I must have still been at school at that time. I remember reading that, oh, it's not just the hijab, it's any outward symbol. And they never, at that time, they never used the word provocative.
Mm-hmm.
It was any outward symbol. I remember my teacher saying, yeah, so that would include like a cross, or it would include like, like the kanga that the Sikh brothers wear, or it would. And so that's what made me think like, oh, maybe that is still happening. But I guess if the actual wording is that it's a provocative symbol, that completely changes the tone of what we're talking about.
Okay, so in the law, it doesn't say provocative. I googled it, like the English word for ostentatoire, and it's ostentatious,
Okay.
which means that it's kind of you can see it too much. What it says is too much. So you can literally have like if you have a small cross, it's okay. But then being Muslim, how do you make your hijab small?
Exactly.
If you want to wear an abaya, how do you make your abaya not too showy? It's like, I don't know, I'm not gonna cut it, then it's not an abaya, it's a mini dress. But the law was created, even if it says that it applies to all religious signs, it has been created for Muslims after, if I remember well, it was two young girls who decided to wear the hijab. The law didn't exist when they wore the hijab at school, and they were expelled from school.
Mm.
And so it created this huge national debate around religious signs at school. But when you see who is wearing religious signs, like in
Mm.
France, which people, which part of the demographic is being is practicing their religion in a way that you can see it? Who,
Mm.
honestly? Muslims.
Exactly.
Muslims.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's Muslims. So it was
Mm.
created, even if they don't say it, we know it. It was created because of us, and especially for us.
For sure. And I think also like although like you just told me the translation of a word, words are so loaded. They're not just about their literal translation. There's a
Exactly.
context and history and tones around them, which obviously like we know and you especially know what is meant by this word.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
even if it says because you can see it too much. So what's the problem if you see
Yeah.
that so does this mean that I'm too Muslim for you? But it's my life. If I want to be too Muslim, I
Mm.
don't care if it's for you. Like,
Mm.
I don't care about. But the problem is that with this law, we don't take us into account.
Mm.
We take how other people feel about us, and I could care less about how people feel about me. If I'm Muslim and I want to wear an abaya and I want to wear hijab, then I'm just going to do it. But the
Mm.
problem is that it's flashy and showy. It makes people uneasy. They don't want to see me. And also we have this whole idea in France that because we refuse to acknowledge the word race, because we say races don't exist, then racism don't exist. So if we want everybody to be similar, we don't want to discriminate someone based on their religion.
Mm.
But I'm Algerian.
Mm.
At this point, if you just look at my face, you're going to know 99% that I'm Muslim. So what shall I do next so you're not going to discriminate me because of my religion? At some
Mm.
point, I'm just not going to fast. I'm just going to fast. And I'm going to be at school and I'm going to be, someone is going to tell me, do you want to eat this? And I'm going to be like, no, I'm fasting. I'm Muslim. So
Mm.
how are you not going to discriminate me? You're going to know either way, regardless of the way I dress, that I'm Muslim. And
Mm.
even if you don't discriminate me based on my religion, then you're going to discriminate me based on my ethnicity. So what shall I do? Shall I change the way I look? Shall I change my hair color? Should I add, I don't have blue eyes, like what can I do? And
Mm.
so it just doesn't make sense for us, but I completely understand that this law makes sense for them. It's
Absolutely.
very convenient for them. It's not convenient
Absolutely.
for us. And it's also
Mm.
very important. That's something I want to mention, that in France, we have very few Muslim private schools.
Mm.
I think we have only one or two max.
Mm.
And private schools are also funded by the government. One of the school, the government is not going to fund them anymore. So it's very difficult for private schools, especially if they're Muslim private schools, to survive without any other funding. However, there are so many Catholic private schools
Mm.
funded by the government. So one thing I
Mm.
don't understand is when you go to a Catholic school, you have, all due respect to my Christian friends, and I have nothing against any other religion, I don't understand, even if you explain it to me, how there can be a Catholic school funded by the government.
Mm.
And so you have a huge cross. But then if I work there, I can't wear the hijab.
Mm.
Maybe there's something I'm missing out, honestly. And if anyone knows, I would love, please explain to me. If this is, I'm genuinely asking. It's not even
Mm.
like ironic or anything. I just don't understand.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
thank God
So
I'm laughing about it.
you mentioned that there's a lack of, or there's like very few Muslim private schools. What's the situation with mosques?
We have quite a lot of mosques pretty much everywhere. There's
Mm.
really no problem with that. Although sometimes it's very hard to get a specific land where you want to build your mosque. Sometimes
Okay.
it can be tricky to get that land, because, well, who wants a mosque in a certain neighborhood? We don't want it, so we're gonna make it hard for you to build your mosque there. We're not gonna give you access. We're not gonna let you buy this land or whatever. But when it comes to mosques, so far it's been, there's no real problem around it, unless there are some that I'm not aware of. Because also, and I think I need to mention this, I do my best to stay away from French politics when it comes to my identity, because
Mhm.
otherwise I think I'd be depressed 24/7. And
Yeah.
I'm really trying to survive here.
I mean, I completely understand that. Absolutely. So what do you think is the experience of young people growing up in France where when they go to school or they go to university they can't wear hijab, for example? Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like exactly what impact that has on people beyond just what they buy, if you know what I mean, for their wardrobe.
I think my experience is very personal, but I think there are parts of it that are also general to many other Muslims, and I'll speak for Muslim women who wear the hijab. So back in the days when I was in high school, I was pretty much the only one in the entire high school. Okay, maybe two, three. My sister, another friend, and me in the entire high school wearing the hijab. You get used to it, that you have to, when once you're in front of the high school, you have to remove your hijab, and then you get into school without the hijab. I did this for 3 entire years. I forgot one single time, and the head of the school, I thought she was going to attack me. She came towards me and she was almost running,
Oh my
and
gosh.
she faced me like and saying, excusez-moi mademoiselle, alors ici c'est un lycée laïque, les signes religieux, which means excuse me miss, in in a harsher tone, this is a like high school, so you have to remove your hijab. And in my entire 3 years, it was the only time I forgot about it.
Mm,
The only time. And I was a very good student. You know, when you want to be sort of like the good immigrant. You
mm,
want to study, you want to be a good student. You don't want to give them any kind of opportunity to blame something on you. So I
mm.
did everything well and I forgot this one time, and I still remember it like it was yesterday.
Oh gosh.
So I think as we're young, for many Muslims, we're very we try to kind of live in denial, like, yeah,
Mm,
you get used to it, etc. Of course I want to wear it every day, it makes me sad, etc. But you also know deep down that something's wrong, and that
mm,
you want to also get out of this situation, because there are always going to be instances like this one, where basically reality, you can't escape it. It's like
mm,
right there in front of you, no matter how you do, no matter how good student you are, no matter the good grades you are, no matter the zero problems you get into, even if like you're the top student, there's always going to be an instance where you're reminded that we don't want you here. The kind of you, no.
mm,
And I know that for me, one of the reasons that I went to university is because I knew I could study with my hijab.
mm,
Otherwise, if I had taken other fields where the studies took place in high schools, I would have to remove my hijab, and that's not something I wanted. It's like at some point you're just tired too. It's like you're tired of having to remove it, remove it, remove it. So I know that for me it's something, and for many other Muslims, it's something that really impacts the choices we make in our life, because we want to stay true to ourselves, to our identity, to our religion as best as we can. It was very difficult back then, but now a lot more Muslim hijabi women are working freelance, or being self-employed. They're their own bosses, so they have this freedom that they wouldn't have if they had a regular job.
mm.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
what your question was actually.
No, no. I think I just wanted you to elaborate on just sort of when we talk about a hijab ban, like the extent of what that means. And I think you said it really perfectly, that fundamentally it affects every decision that you make. And I'm just trying to get my head around, like, if you are a child and you are constantly receiving the message that you cannot be your true authentic self in a school, in a government building, in a government owned institute, you cannot be your authentic self. To receive that message day in, day out, what it must do to then how you grow up, and like the ideas that you develop, both about yourself but about the world more
Hmm.
generally as well. And it's really scary, and I think something we should be so aware of in terms of just exactly what message we're allowing young people to absorb about themselves, and
Hmm.
the severe consequences of that. And I think as like a, I don't know, like an extension, I guess, because obviously at the moment we're witnessing over 2 months of the recent escalation of war on Gaza, and there is protests happening around the world. What does political activism for Muslims look like in France at the moment?
So at the moment, it's, well, considering the fact that we're centering the conversation on Palestine, it's protests, BDS, also speaking up around your in your environment, like close environment. But it's also very tricky again in workplaces, because we all know that freedom of speech is very limited for us. And we all know that speaking up for Palestine as a Muslim is going to come off as you're siding with them because you're either Arab or Muslim,
Mm,
not because. this is a colonization and it's wrong. And if you want to call it something else than colonization, fine. But then it's not going to change the fact that babies and children and women and pregnant women and fathers and the elderly are being killed every second. So it's it's very difficult. And we do, even for protests, in my city, protests are not that big, because again, I live in a city that isn't very much into activism. So, but most of the people who come to the protest are Muslim people. So I'm not sure how effective this is, and it pains me to say this, honestly, that Muslims are going out to support Palestine, but I'm not sure how effective it is, because what people are seeing is that a bunch of Muslims protesting for Palestine, and all I know about Palestine is the HAMS, which I can't say because I don't know why. I just been conditioned not to say this. And so I'm not sure, are we really bringing a change by these protests or not? But also I try to see it in a positive light, because again, my city is not very much of an activist city, yet these protests have been happening
Mm.
every Saturday, and people are showing up regardless of the number. And also, I think I live in Bordeaux, and Bordeaux is very different from Paris. I think when we talk about France, a lot of people think Paris, which has this image of chic, elegant Paris, city of love, Eiffel Tower. By the way, just so you know, everyone, the Eiffel Tower was built with iron that was stolen from Algeria. So technically, the Eiffel Tower is Algerian. But yeah, that's the image that we get of France. But there are a lot of different cities, and Bordeaux is very different from Paris in the sense that it's very elegant. It's a beautiful city, but if you're here to have conversations about Palestine, you want to grow, I don't know, a book club that's very decolonial, etc., anti-racist, it's going to be very difficult to
Mm.
do this in Bordeaux. Very,
Mm.
very difficult. So that's why I'm saying it's amazing that these protests have been happening every Saturday, regardless of the number showing up, the number of people showing up. What was your question again? I feel like I'm not answering the question.
No, no, you answered the question great, which was what does political activism for Muslims look like right now in France, especially around Palestine? And I think looking at any sort of protest happening anywhere at the moment is heartening, and especially as you said, like in a place where you wouldn't expect political activism to be something that people are doing.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, personally, I have been really heartened just by seeing the difference and the sort of the way in which people have been able to sustain pressure at the moment as well. I guess my only thing is that I hope that we realize collectively that, like, hopefully inshallah there will be a ceasefire. And
Inshallah.
once there is a ceasefire, we have to keep up the pressure because that
Absolutely.
is the very first step of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Um,
think we just need to boycott. I think someone sent me a video a few weeks ago. It's not about boycotting. It's really about canceling, like the
yeah.
whole thing, like forever, like just not today. Like once there's a ceasefire, what's gonna happen? People are going
Mm,
back to their old habits, and they're gonna forget about Palestine. But no, I mean, Palestinians are still dying every day, every year, 24/7. There's no break for us. A ceasefire is going to give them just the chance to catch a breath, but then things are going to go back to the old days, and the old days were not good days for them. So we have
mm,
to keep it up until Palestine is free, and it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to for people to stay focused. I don't know why, and it's frustrating because it's not just a trend. It's not just during the bombings. And as an Algerian, I feel this because 132 years, I just don't want this to happen to Palestine, and it's already been 75 years.
Mm.
So until when? We live in a time and age when we have social media, we have so many tools that we didn't have. And we say we, I mean as Algerians, but also like all countries that were colonized. Today we have so many tools to use to stay focused until the very end and to actively participate in the liberation of Palestine until Palestine is actually free. But people just tend to forget, like it's a trend.
Mm. We live in an age, yeah, I think we live in an age of trends. And I mean, I want to use this word sensitively, but like drama, like it feels like things have to capture our attention. And what captures the mass attention at the moment is the bloodshed.
Exactly.
When the bloodshed eases, it feels like people feel like, okay, it's okay now, it's okay.
It's not.
But the
That's a
reality is
problem. It's not.
exactly, and the issue isn't just what the current bombings and starvation of the people. It is the fact that we are dealing with 75 years of illegal occupation and forcing people out of their homes and claiming land that isn't theirs. Like the Gaza Strip is already so small.
And I'm just gonna add, claiming a land that isn't theirs based on religion, something that if we Muslim did this,
Mm,
it would be the end of the world. Imagine Muslims saying, "We're gonna take this land because Allah said in the Quran, this is your land." Do you think
yeah,
the US would support us? I wonder.
absolutely,
I wonder.
absolutely. I want to move on and speak a little bit more now about book recommendations. So, you are an avid reader and a book critic. What are you reading at the moment? What are some of the things that you're currently reading? Things that you're interested in learning about right now?
So right now, all I'm reading about is Palestine. But my reading is a little bit messy. I haven't been able to focus because I'm always on my phone trying to get the news, what's happening, what can I do, how can I convince this person, where can I share this, how can I get more engagement because the shadow banning. So I feel like sharing on Instagram is very important, but also if I know that if I share too much, my engagement decreases. So
Yeah.
what's the point of sharing if only two people see it? But also, it's important to share even if only two people see it. So I've been thinking about everything, trying my best to read, but it hasn't been really fruitful. So I started 10 Minutes About Palestine by Ilan Pape. I also started I Saw Ramallah by Murid Barghouti, and right now I just started I think the title in English is Passage to the Plaza by Sahar
Mm.
Khalifa, who is another Palestinian author. And because so I'm reading Passage to the Plaza in French. I just want to
Oh,
say in
wow.
French because I know I said I really don't read a lot in French. But again, for this book, I have a specific goal, which is to read it in my very recently created book club, the Watermelon Book Club, because I want French people to read about Palestine.
Mm.
And so books, Palestinian books in the French publishing industry are very hard to come by. Either they haven't been republished, so you'll find ancient editions that cost, it's so expensive, nobody can afford it. Recently, we also, by the way, we have the translation of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pape, who was removed from all bookstores by the publishing house because we don't want to add fuel to the fire.
Wow.
So you know the situation in France when I say freedom of expression is like, I know that freedom of expression is a lie everywhere, but I feel, France takes that little extra step because why not? Who, if we don't do it, who's gonna do it? Nobody. So France gotta do it. um. So yeah. So I'm reading Sahar Khalifa in French to force people to read it, to get into it, but also to work on it together, to share our opinion together, to kind of also create this safe space where you can say what you want and express yourself, your doubts, your insecurities, your lack of knowledge about Palestine together. So these are my current reads.
Hmm. And what about any book recommendations you may have on, I don't know, like French Algerian stories or French and Algerian history? Also, maybe living in France as a Muslim. Like, are there any books in that field that you recommend?
I was actually waiting for that question because you know what I'm going to say. So for French Algerian literature, I the first author I recommend, and it's for me my favorite author. It's Faiz Again. So Faiz Again is Algerian and French. She is an author. She wrote her first book, I think, when she was 16, 17, and it's called Kif Kif Tomorrow. I'm
Mm.
not sure if you've heard of it. It was a huge, it was a bestseller, and if French publishers didn't expect this at all. And what I like about her, so her two books are Men Don't Cry, which was published, translated and published by Xara Public Press, and Discretion by Sapi Books. These two books are my absolute favorite because the way she describes the experience of French Algerians is so straight to the point
Mm.
that don't try to think what does she mean by this. No, if she means something, she's gonna write it, and there's
Mm.
no space for doubt or unclarity or anything. And that's something very that I don't find even if Algerian authors who write in French. And she really doesn't shy away from the taboo topics that very few tackle, like the hijab. I
Mm.
think I don't want to say she's the only author, but to me, so far, she's the only one I've read who actually mentions the law about the hijab. That doesn't make sense. You want to free women, but then you force them to remove the hijab. You want them to be free the way you want. So how does freedom come into that? And she really writes it like the way I'm saying it. You know,
Yeah.
there's no metaphor that you need to understand by yourself, because at this point I personally feel that it's too much. It's asking
Mm.
too much for French readers, because are they willing to take that extra step to actually understand the meaning behind this? I don't think so. So we might as well just give it to them straight. And that's
Mm.
what she does. That's why I absolutely love her books. I think started reading again in French through her books. I was really waiting. I really find the way she expressed things, I wouldn't say liberating, but I'm like, finally, someone's saying it. Is it just me who thinks that
Mm.
we're not talking about these topics? Can you just say it? Just do it. And she's the one who does it. So Phase Again for sure. Please go read Phase Again. Then, so you have French Algerian authors. Honestly, out of my mind, just Phase Again comes because I really don't read a lot of French. I do read a lot of Algerian literature. It's not French
Mm.
Algerian. Again, I think I don't read French Algerian because I connect much better with parents than with
Mm.
children of immigrants, because
Yeah.
I'm not second generation, but I'm not first generation. I'm kind of in between. So I sometimes get the two, but I feel more close to parents, and I don't find their views in the books that I read written by children of immigrants, French children of immigrants. So I'm not necessarily drawn towards books written by children of immigrants unless it's very, very, very good and it comes highly recommended by this person and that and this and that, people who I really trust. Then I'm more into Algerian literature, which is also very hard to find translated in English. I just want to say something. If you ever want to read Algerian literature, I would not necessarily recommend Yasmina Khadra. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. So he's very, very famous in France and in Algeria. And to me, if a North African a North African writer is extremely famous in France, an immediate red flag.
Something something is not quite right. Yeah.
Exactly, like something is not quite right. And so he's very famous, so his books come up a lot. He's written about Afghanistan. Like, why have you been there? Have you experienced what it's like living under the Taliban? Are you a
Mm.
woman yourself to write from a woman point of view? So it just kind of feel very off. And the problem is that his books have been made into graphic novels, into movies, into like describing the history of colonization between French and Algeria as a love, forbidden love, or as a divorce. I'm like, I don't think so. If it really was a marriage, that would be it was a forced marriage, and the woman was gravely abused for 132 years. But either way, why would you compare it to a divorce? It's not a divorce.
Is he still in Algeria?
He lives in France, I think, but he's he's Algerian for sure. I'm not sure if he has like French nationality or something. I don't know. And it's very sad because he had great books at the beginning when he started writing, and then I feel the more he writes, the less great it is. It's become
Mm.
very cliche. He also wrote about Baghdad, about Iraq. I haven't read this book, I'm not gonna read it, so I just can't give any opinion on it. But he did write about Palestine, and that's when I find it very, very problematic. And that's also why I personally on my platform really want to amplify Palestinian voices, because nobody knows what it's like to be Palestinian besides Palestinian. Like, it is so ambitious to want to write for Palestinians. If you have the guts, do it, but then 100% it's gonna be it, it might mislead people. And
For
so,
sure.
as an Algerian, he wrote a book about Palestine where an Arab Israeli doctor is married and his wife commits a how do you call this? You know, when you kill yourself using a bomb and then you bomb the whole place.
Suicide.
Eh?
Suicide attack.
Yes, a
Suicide.
suicide. Yes, but the title of the book is The Attack. But which attack? Why, by whom, and why? And the first thing that you remember is that the attack, the suicide attack, is made by a Palestinian woman against Israeli civilians. I don't understand. Then
Mm.
throughout the book, the doctor, Arab Israeli, tries to understand why his wife did this. He realized that he was really out of touch with his wife because she was very much into the resistance, and he was just living his regular life, not really questioning his identity, etc. And as he goes on to understand what happens, he realizes that even if he is Israeli, he is Arab, and so the Israeli army isn't gonna give him a pass because he's Israeli, and racism, and he's going to be oppressed, etc. But I'm like, it's such it's so misleading because you can actually decide to say, well, she is Palestinian, she killed people, she
Mm.
killed a lot of
Absolutely.
people, she is a terrorist.
And the thing is, that is what will be taken from the book. Like, even if there are some really nuanced descriptions of other things and there's a nuanced exploration of Arab Israeli identity or whatever, even all of that, the one thing that people will take away is that this Palestinian woman
Exactly.
killed.
That's how the book starts. That's how the story opens. Of course,
Yeah,
that's
that's
the one thing that you're going to remember. And as much as I encourage people to think for themselves and
mm,
just be critical, there's so many ways you can get this story wrong.
yeah,
I, I
absolutely.
I'm pro-Palestinian.
I'm
Obviously, I'm
just
gonna
going.
side with Palestinians who've been oppressed for I don't know how many years. Actually,
Mm,
75. But if I'm not, then who am I going to side with?
mm,
It's
yeah.
presented in such a biased way. It's very sad because I think it's which is why I really love Faiza Gan, because when she writes, she knows who she's writing for.
Yes, she's very unapologetic. I have to definitely second your recommendations. I love her work. I love her work. And I mean, obviously, I already read the English translations. I don't know what it would be like to read the original text, but I think she explores such interesting concepts with such nuance, but she's also, as you said, just very clear. She doesn't shy away from these big questions.
And mostly because she knows who she's writing for.
Yeah,
If you don't agree with her, then by all means don't. She's not writing for you.
yeah,
But the problem that you find with the attack by Yasmina Khadra is I find myself asking, who is he writing this book for? The problem is that he's writing it for everyone.
yeah,
And good for me, I'm pro-Palestinian, alhamdulillah. But if you're writing it for everyone, then a big chunk of your readers
yeah.
are not
I think,
pro-Palestinian. But then
yeah.
the point, I'm guess, is he doesn't want to lose his readers.
Mm,
So there are also a lot of ethics and morals to take into account. I'm not saying that he doesn't have morals or he doesn't have ethics. God knows. I don't know what's happening in his head, what he's doing. These are my own assumptions that might be
yeah.
wrong, but that's just
Mm.
how I'm feeling it.
Exactly. And I think that insight is really important. And, you know, there are a lot of books out there in the world, but that doesn't mean that all of them are to be read by everybody or are good or contributing to something that is positive.
Exactly.
You know, it's really important, I think, as well, like when it comes to reading around Palestine, obviously to read Palestinian voices, but to be able to, not just in terms of reading, but when you come across any information, to be able to determine for yourself what is true and what is not, what is misleading, what is propaganda, what is an authentic source and what is not. I think to be able to empower yourself and educate yourself enough to be able to do that
Hmm.
is a really important place to start. But you know what, Assia, I have really loved speaking to you on the show today. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
for
time.
asking me all of these questions. Honestly, you had all of the right questions. And honestly, also thank you for giving me a space where I can express myself freely, which isn't something I usually get. And so it's a true honor for me to have been able to express myself without any second thoughts or oh maybe I should say this, maybe I shouldn't say this. Oh, so
No,
thank you,
thank you.
Samia.
Honestly, it has been so wonderful and just so insightful. I think anybody listening will take away so much, and I hope we'll just be left with a lot to think about as well and reflect on.
I hope to too. I mean, I also I can't wait for everyone's feedback, and I also listened to my favorite episode was the one with Ilham and Ola,
Okay.
and I also learned so much from it. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, for giving space for all these amazing people that unfortunately we don't live in the same country to see each other. But you, thank you for the virtual space and for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Asia. Thank you so much to Assia for her time today. This was such an insightful and super interesting conversation. I loved every second of it, and I hope you who are listening did too. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I'd really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the show.